Welcome to Between the Covers Summer Series with our spotlight on South Florida. I'm Ann Bocock, and I'm here with author and historian Robert Watson. His new book is America's First Plague, the deadly epidemic that crippled a nation. We often say that COVID was unprecedented, but it wasn't the first plague to ravage this country. Thank you for coming and take us back to Philadelphia and yellow fever?
Yeah. Well, Ann, it's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you for what you do. I enjoy the show. Yeah, so during COVID, I was stuck inside like the rest of the world, looking for something to do, and I thought, why don't I write a book about the first pandemic? I assumed it would be the Spanish flu, influenza, in the early 1900s, and I found that in 1793, there was a horrible pandemic. In fact, my title of the book, America's First Plague, comes from newspapers, politicians, the public. They called it the plague. And it struck Philadelphia, which was the interim capital city, while what is Washington, D.C. today, while that was being built. I estimate that it killed at least 10% of the population of the capital city. And then it tore up and down the eastern seaboard. The death toll may have been as high as 20%. So it was a devastating disease, as you correctly noted, yellow fever. What made it even worse, yellow fever comes from a mosquito, Aedes aegypti. It means the unwelcome Egyptian in Latin. But nobody then knew what caused it. There was no vaccination, no known cure. So the panic, the chaos was off the charts.
The way you wrote this, it was a nightmare during this time. Here it is, Philadelphia, you said, was the interim capital for the country. Was also the center of medicine at the time. And here we have people, they don't understand viruses, they don't understand bacteria, but yet they managed to have a lot of theories.
Yeah, they sure did. So Philadelphia was the most important city. Of course, it's where the Declaration was written, Constitutional Convention. It had been an interim capital. It was the first circulating public library, the home of Benjamin Franklin. So Philadelphia was the main city without question, and the centerpiece of medicine in the country. Sadly, tragically, I called the chapter on this the Physicians' War, and I got that directly from newspapers. Physicians were arguing it was a flat-out war over what caused it and how they should treat it, and they got it dead wrong. Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration, he was America's most favorite and most esteemed physician, our Hippocrates, you might say. Benjamin Rush got it dead wrong. They believed in two things. One was phlegms. Body fluids and phlegms were off balance. Therefore, he believed we need to purge people. His patients had constant diarrhea and vomiting. He had them use mercury, poisonous roots, and when that didn't work, he gave them even more. In fact, other physicians, and even Alexander Hamilton, who opposed him, said that he's a scourge worse than the disease, and he probably killed as many people as the disease. The other theory was miasma, or miasmata, which is foul air, rotted coffee, a dead animal, swamps. They thought that foul air was a part, and they got both wrong. It turned out it was a mosquito. So the cause and the cure were both completely wrong.
Like you do in every book of yours that I've read, you managed to find some extraordinary people, some heroes. In this one, doctors that put their life on the line. They didn't know what they were dealing with. They were experimenting. Where did you find them?
Yeah, well, fortunately, during COVID, I had a lot of time for research, and there was some people at the Library of Congress, which was closed, but came in and helped me by sending me documents and digging up things for me. But there were a number of doctors who stayed in Philadelphia and treated their patients, even though they thought it was contagious. It wasn't, but they thought it was. The wharf, the dock area in Philadelphia was called Helltown. And here's one truism in history, no matter where you are. The docks were hellish. This is pirates, criminals, sailors. It was just the worst place. And these doctors bravely went down to this Helltown at the docks, even if they thought it was contagious. Several doctors contracted it. Several doctors died. There was a French doctor named Jean de Visay, who's from what was present-day Haiti, back then Saint-Domingue. And he had seen it before, or variations of it, and he was willing to treat the people dying. He went into the worst conditions, exposed himself to it. So there were some absolute heroes in the medical field, even though other doctors got it dead wrong.
There are so many comparisons to COVID.
Yeah.
Not only did you write the book during the pandemic, but here we have, in this time, there's panic, there's fear, there's mistrust of the government.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is affecting marginalized communities.
Yep.
Did that amaze you
Yeah.
when you were living this and then writing this?
In fact, one thing I did, and I talked to my editor about it, was I didn't think people would believe me if I wrote it, so I used quotes from politicians, newspapers, physicians. The mayor of Philadelphia, Matthew Clarkson, was very enlightened. George Washington, as president, was there, so they asked people to wear masks. And half the people did, the other half said it's their freedom. They refused to wear a mask. They asked people to socially distance, to walk on opposite sides of the street, to stay indoors. And they noticed that people were getting sick who were out at sunset. Now, that's when mosquitoes are active. They didn't know it was from a mosquito. So they asked people to refrain from that. And people purposely gathered in groups saying it's our right to do this. Preachers called their flocks out at sunset and said, we're going to pray it away. So the same fights over COVID we saw pour out. One of the political parties was trying to enforce all this. The other one was blaming them and saying it's our right to not do it. And unfortunately, another truism you find throughout history, every culture, every country, every period in time, they blamed immigrants. It came from immigrants. Then they blamed the black community. Then they blamed the Jewish community. Some preachers called a theater in town the synagogue of Satan, saying it's the evil of the theater and the evil of Jews in the city. So the same horrible bigotry that has plagued humanity, unfortunately plagued us in our interim capital city. And the fear and panic, as you correctly noted, it was such that, diseases, wars, things of this always bring out the best in humanity, but they always bring out the worst. And this brought out both.
Quick lightning round, either a sentence or a word for these few questions. The best or the worst advice you got before you started writing?
Find your own style. Don't try to be Stephen Jay Gould, Kurt Vonnegut, David McCullough, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Just write with your own style. It'll flow more naturally. And then somebody else said, write it like it's a movie, to make it so it visually, the colors, the sounds, what people were doing that morning, that way it hops off the pages.
What was the trickiest part of writing this book?
Some of the Old English. I found some diaries from some Quakers, a woman named Elizabeth Drinker, and every other word is ye, thy, so it's a little cumbersome to read, especially handwritten.
If there was a one-word teaser for what this book is about, what is that word?
Overcoming. Yeah, we overcame it. This nation endured. When this almost ended the nation, but we endured.
If we could see your bookshelf at home, what would that say about you?
I love history. Full of history books, yeah.
And lastly, one thing that you would tell your younger self?
Learn other languages. I have barely some degree of understanding of a few languages. I would have tried to become fluent in several languages.
This book is fascinating, and we only just touched the surface. It is America's first plague, the deadly epidemic that crippled a young nation. As always, Dr. Robert Watson, you have taught me something, and I love the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it.
I'm Ann Bocock. Please join me on the next Between the Covers.